Good morning, ladies. Happy Monday. Hope this message finds you well. Get up. Let's go. Let's move it. It is a brand new week. And it's a week where my boy, my son, comes home tomorrow. Finished his 11th grade. Passed on more senior classes than I even expected. Graduated with his little bank with 4 awards, certificate for PowerPoint and Office and other things. I mean, I couldn't be any happier. However, we're going to get this going. I have to work at the office today. A lot to do. I have to plan an entire, recognition party in the training room, have everything set up. I got to go buy things, decorate, but busy day ahead today. Busy day ahead. But before I head to the office, you know what we're going to be doing. 1 Samuel chapter 17 and 18 is what we'll be going over today. And hopefully, wherever this message finds you, you can take in the word and get your day starting off right. So, David and Goliath. If you haven't heard about good old David and Goliath, that's what we'll be talking about today. So, first one goes like this. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Sukkah, which belonged to Judah. They encamped between Sukkah and Azekah and Ephes Demim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and grew up in the battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood up on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with the valley in between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and bronze had javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Verse 8, Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said, Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I deny the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was a son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and third Shema. David was the youngest. And the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near and prevented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Verse 17, Then Jesse said to his son David, Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in the battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then he talked with them. There was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up from the armies of Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. Verse 24, And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and it shall be that man who kills him, and the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is the uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the manner, saying, So shall it be done for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and said, Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for them. Then David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by the beard and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, The Lord who had delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you. Verse 38, So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He has also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give you your flesh unto the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. David was just talking game, let's just say that. He was just talking a whole bunch of smack before he was going to kill this guy. Then David said to the Philistines, You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you, and I will take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Verse 47, Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the sun sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistines with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Verse 52, Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. But when Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. Verse 56 of the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. Then, as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? So David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. We are now in chapter 18, verse 1. Now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house any more. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him, and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it had happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the young women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times, but there was fear in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Verse 12, now Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence, and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Therefore when Saul saw that he had behaved very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. Verse 17, then Saul said to David, here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let my hands not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. So David said to Saul, who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be a son-in-law to the king? But it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Bethlehemite as a wife. Now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. So Saul said, I will give her to him, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistine may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall be my son-in-law today. What a bad heart. Ooh, no wonder you got the Lord went away from you, Saul. Then you wonder why. Verse 22, and Saul commanded his servants, communicate with David secretly and say, look, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore become the king's son-in-law. Verse 23, so Saul's servants spoke those words in the hearing of David. And David said, does it seem to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing I am a poor and a lightly esteemed man? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, in this manner David spoke. Then Saul said, thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Now the days had not expired. Therefore David arose and went, he and his men, and he killed 200 men of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins and gave them in full to count to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul became David's enemy continually. Verse 30. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war, and so it was, wherever they went, that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. That is all for today's Bible study, ladies. I tell you, the Lord knows your heart. Don't have a bad heart where you're tricking people and doing things bad to get things for your favor, because let me tell you, it never goes your way. It'll never go your way. It just never goes your way. So I don't know if that was a message for somebody today, but keep a pure and kind heart, no matter what the circumstances. And I assure you, I know it's easier said than done. You have to die to your flesh. You really do. But if you just stay the course, stay faithful, stay true, stay loyal, don't have a bad heart, God blesses that, and God will redeem. God will redeem, God will redeem, God will redeem. So let's go. Let's do this. I'm ready. I can't be more excited, even though I barely slept properly. My sleeping schedule's all jacked, but I don't care. Okay. Because I get to see him tomorrow. And new chapter, new season ahead. Summertime is on top of that, kicking in and reeling in. And it couldn't be any better. Now let's do this. Stay blessed, and we'll talk soon.